everybody. This is a weird option, isn't it? This does seem like a weird type of video to do, don't you think? Talking about movies based on how long they are. Does that really matter much? Well, I looked at it and I thought to myself, that does seem kind of dumb. But then I realized, who cares? I couldn't think of anything else for now. So, yep, today I am going to be making a top 10 list on 10 movies that are very long. You know, I don't know, there's a lot of movies out there that I've watched that are pretty long, but here I am going to talk about 10 of the longest movies I have ever seen in the history of movies that I have seen. These movies I rank based off of, how long they are. It's going to be ranked off of longest. Well, it's like the 10th spot is going to be the shortest out of all of the movies, and the number one spot is going to be the longest one. They're all very long movies that I've watched. And this list, I'll be talking about those movies, about, what they do to fill up the runtime and why they're so long. You know? It's just, these are all good movies also. I'm not going to be putting any movies I didn't like on this list. All of these films are movies that I really enjoyed. And they're going to be very, you're not going to have to worry about me talking about my hatred for the runtime. For anything, maybe, I can still enjoy the movie despite the runtime. Or maybe have a problem because of the runtime. With that said, let's count.
No Time to Die. Now here's the more recent one that I watched that's pretty long. No Time to Die just recently came out last month. And I saw it, of course, because I have an obsession with James Bond movies. Okay, not an obsession, they're not that great, but I enjoy watching them. And so, of course, I would have to watch this one, as it's the newest Bond film. That definitely is something that I could enjoy. So, let's talk about this movie. What does this movie have to offer? Well, the newest No Time to Die movie is a runtime of 2 hours and 43 minutes, which is pretty long, and is actually, I think, the longest James Bond movie out of all of the, at least, Daniel Craig Bond films. I can't say it's the longest out of all of the Bond movies ever to come out, but compared to every film Daniel Craig appeared in, this is the longest one. And of course is the final installment in the franchise of Daniel Craig Bond films. I know you could say this is a whole franchise of 25 movies, but each one I personally think is just separated by which actor chooses to play the Bond character, because they all seem to take place in their own world, I bet. And with No Time to Die, our series of Daniel Craig's Bond is over. He did a pretty good job. He represented the character pretty well. He's not no Sean Connery, but he did a nice job. And what does this movie have to do to make its runtime big? Well, I mean, since this is the final installment in all of the Daniel Craig films, of course there's a lot of stuff you gotta make to it. You gotta try to make your adventure as epic and as insane as possible. Make sure it's more epic compared to the other ones that we saw come from this character. Because Casino Royale is considered his best work, and some could say you can't get any more epic than that. Well, No Time to Die tried to become more epic than that, and did not do a horrible job, actually. In fact, they probably did a good job. I'm not saying they're better than Casino Royale, but it certainly does do a nice job finishing off the series of Bond films that we all grown to enjoy. So, with that series over, what did this movie wrap up with? I would tell you if I wasn't a big spoiler jerk like I used to be, but if you do want to know what this movie has to offer to finish off, you can check it out yourself. It's coming on digital soon, so be ready for that. But I'm not going to spoil anything because I learned my lesson about that. I used to be a big spoiler dude back in the day. Not like that anymore, so be happy. I'm just telling you it's a very long movie that wraps up a lot, and definitely does do it in a fine way. It's a good film. It's not better than Casino Royale in my opinion, but compared to how to finish off your character in its films, it does good. The Dark Knight Rises. And here is yet another finisher offer for a franchise. With The Dark Knight Rises, we conclude the Dark Knight trilogy, a trilogy of free Batman films that push the limit of how epic superhero movies can be, while also how dark superhero movies can be. Because if you're thinking of a dark superhero, what comes to mind? Deadpool. Who else? Wolverine. Okay, DC. Batman, of course. Batman is a dark superhero, not just with his costume art, but with how its movies go. Its Batman movies that Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher made were not that dark. I mean, they had dark imagery, but overall they were nice and friendly enough for kids to watch. But when Christopher Nolan came around, The Dark Knight has started to become more of a Dark Knight, with its movies being more edgier when possible. And with The Dark Knight, the second installment in the trilogy being the best one, being one of my favorite movies ever, we now have the conclusion, which isn't better, but is longer. The Dark Knight Rises, the trilogy conclusion. It's the longest one, it's 2 hours and 44 minutes, and it finishes off our franchise as we know it. We're still getting some more Batman movies, we're getting another Batman movie next year, but for what Christopher Nolan and for what Christian Bale had to offer, it's over. So how much more can you wrap up? What does this movie do? Well, first off, we don't have the Joker anymore, not just because of his defeat in the second film, but because the actor who played him in the second movie, Heath Ledger, who, in all honesty, was the greatest decision ever, sadly passed away that same year, and so they couldn't get anybody to replace him because, again, you can just not replace him. Like, who would replace him? Jared Leto? That would be stupid. Anyway, yeah, so they got a new villain, Bane, the evil, weird mask type of dude played by Tom Hardy, who does a pretty nice job portraying Bane. I mean, it was definitely a much better Bane than the Bane we got in, say, Batman and Robin, which is definitely nothing that we should be surprised of. So, yeah, Tom Hardy is Bane, and he does a great job as him. We have all the other characters returning with a new adventure that finishes everything off. I mean, of course you got this movie's long. It has to be long. If it's the trilogy conclusion, it has to be the longest one because there's just so much you have to wrap up. When you have a franchise that's so perfect, how much can you do to try to make your second or third film better? Well, with the final installment not being better than The Dark Knight, but still being a good way of concluding this trilogy to an idea of all fun. It's a movie that definitely knows what we can expect from a hero like Batman. Interstellar. Here's another Christopher Nolan movie, only this one is a standalone film. It's basically like the future 2001 A Space Odyssey with the same idea of someone going to space. Only this time it's more impactful. It seems to spend its time more focusing on more time on Earth than it does on space. And I'll admit, I enjoyed this movie, but for the reason of it spending most of its time on Earth and just trying to impact as much, rather than doing much on space, it wasn't really that good in my opinion. It was good, it was okay, but I don't know, I just thought it would have been a little bit more epic. I mean, I know I shouldn't expect epic, groundbreaking visuals. I mean, come on, we already have those at the time. But I was expecting a good story at least, and I was at least expecting to be excited all the way through. I just unfortunately wasn't. And it's sad because I was expecting a lot to come from this. I just didn't get it. They tried, but for a movie with a long run time, sadly, they failed. Good movie, but could have been better in my opinion. I'm sorry. I know people love this film, but it was okay in me. Patton. Patton, the installment of the character with a huge mindset. Patton is the very epic type of soldier. It's a movie based off of the events of the military in, say, World War One or World War Two. I can't remember which set time this was set in, but all I can remember is it was a military war film that has a long runtime of about 2 hours and 50 minutes. And this movie spends 2 hours and 50 minutes talking about the events of war. Another film I enjoyed, but could have enjoyed a little bit better, unfortunately. I at least enjoyed, the performance George C. Scott gives, as well as the ideas of events that this movie references. So I enjoyed the ideas that this movie can give us with its long abilities, but again, those long runtime can make some of the moments kind of boring. In some movies, the long runtime works, but in others, I kind of have to call that a flaw. The Great Escape. This movie, when I heard about the runtime, I didn't mind it. And when I first started watching this film, I think I could have considered it to be honestly a great movie. This actually really could have surprised me of being an incredible film. being one of my favorites ever, maybe even topping to be my favorite film of the 60s. But as the film progressed, it kind of lowered the expectations. I enjoyed the movie still, definitely still loved it. But unfortunately, I kind of was getting disappointed by the longer it got. Because I knew it was going to be a long movie, definitely, but with a story about a bunch of people escaping a prison arc to go leave, would have worked pretty well, as it spends most of the film about them suffering through the prison cells, and then the final act being them escaping. That would have been a great idea. But after they escaped, we got about 20 minutes of nothing really interesting. Like, the last 20 minutes of the movie it's just nothing interesting. It's them just escaping and then just doing God knows what. There's really isn't anything cool to see. We see them running out from people who are getting them back, but that's it. It doesn't really end in a good way. The movie really could have been a great film, but I just did not like its ending. And it's sad because I'm giving this movie all the credit it deserves. It was a really good film. It just could have been a great one. It could have been the actual great escape. Or like the poster says, great adventure, great entertainment. It was good entertainment. So yeah, I enjoyed this movie, but its long runtime kind of made some of the moments lack for me. Oh well, better luck next time. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Here's another film that I enjoyed a lot, but thanks to its runtime, could have enjoyed a tad better. Look, I know I said I won't bother too much about the runtime, but I did try to tell you all that some of them will have a problem with their runtime to me, because in some ways, a runtime like that kind of makes some moments seem boring. And for as much as I really enjoyed this movie, and the performances we got from characters like Clint Eastwood, God, I love that guy. Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of think that maybe this movie's runtime could have been shorter, because most of the moments that fill up the film's long 2 hours and 50 minutes, I just don't think that it wasn't enough. I think this movie could have been a little shorter if most of the moments in the movie just weren't taken out, because they just don't seem to add anything. I mean, the epicness of this movie, the music, the wide shots, they were all a lot of fun. I enjoyed this movie's incredible use of film and ability. You know, sometimes though, I think you gotta give a movie its flaws, and the flaws this movie has kind of has to do with how long it is. Long movies can be good, but when you fill them up with moments that are kind of pointless, that's where I kind of seem to lose my hopes. I mean, pointless moments can happen a lot of times. Just the pointless moments in this movie aren't as epic as I could have expected. I enjoyed this movie. It's a really good movie. I recommend it to those. But to those who don't like to watch long movies, to those who prefer movies under 2 hours, and to those who want to watch a movie over 2 hours that's good and entertaining, I don't know if you kids these days will have an obsession with this one for its long film. You might enjoy it as an adult, just probably not at this age. Avengers Endgame. Here's the first film in the entire top 10 list that is actually a total of over 3 hours long. We all know that. When we all were ready to see what the final Avengers film would give us, and we saw that the movie's actually going to be 3 hours long, we all were like, damn, we're ready to see it. I was ready to see it. I knew that if a movie was 3 hours long, sheesh, I'm going to be up for something. And I was, because Avengers Endgame is now one of my favorite movies ever, and that's why I love it. But why is it number 4? Well, like I said, I'm not ranking this list on how much I love the movies. I'm ranking them on how long the movies are. And yeah, this is the first film in the list to be 3 hours long. Every other film you're going to see here is over 3 hours long, which is a big surprise to think about, and to the fact that I've actually seen them and I like them. But yeah, Avengers Endgame is one of my favorites. You've seen me talk about it before. I love how epic it is, and the 3 hour runtime is there to tell us a conclusion to what this movie is going to give us, as we have to see the impact of events that Infinity War gave us, of all of the Avengers, half of the Avengers being wiped away, as well as half the entire overall universe being wiped away, to see how that can all be fixed, and how Avengers Endgame can wrap up what these Avengers gave us, with a franchise that's still going to go on after this, but for this one main group that made the franchise so much fun, we have to see what they're going to end with. That's why it's called Endgame. The game to end it all. What will it give us? If you want to see the movie and haven't, even though I bet a lot of you have already seen it, in fact I bet everybody who's watching this video right now has seen it, then, well, That's good, because you know that this movie was there to wrap things up at a long time. But if you haven't seen it for some reason, then I guess if you want to see how the Avengers finished their life off, check it out. Titanic. This movie is 3 hours and 11 minutes long, which is pretty big of a movie. It tells the biography, story, the history of how the Titanic sunk, while bringing in a new fantasy to us, with a story that never happened on the Titanic but was made to make this movie more entertaining, which is what makes it one of my favorite romance films ever, as the movie is there to make a romance be set in a real historic event. Let's say have these two love couples being a love couple on a ship that's about to sink. That is something that you just would always love to see. The movie was great, and I enjoyed it. I guess it kind of was too sad over the time. I kind of think they kind of made the story a little too depressing at times. But I still love the film, and it is still one of my favorite romances to think about. A lot of people consider this to be the most iconic romance to ever come out of cinema history. And I love it too. I can agree, it's very iconic. It may not be my favorite of all time, but it is the most iconic of all time to what I've heard of. I enjoy the ship sinking to see all the impact it created and all the sadness this movie gave us, as it has to see how much romance it can create, while also how much seriousness it can create. And that is what Titanic has to offer us. It's a mad, 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 mad world. Never heard of it? It's a comedy film from the 60s. A story about a bunch of people who hear that there is a treasure hidden somewhere on an island in a faraway area that they all have to race to get. Whoever gets it first keeps the whole pack of money. And that's what this movie gives us. A big road trip film about a bunch of people who are racing to get some money. That sounds pretty nice. But the movie is 3 hours long. And over 3 hours long. It's longer than Titanic. So how can a movie with that kind of story be that long? Well, when you have a road trip film about people getting money from a faraway area, instead of pacing it down to be shorter, they try to make it seem like it's set in a long area. Like the movie is filmed without any cuts. It's just all filmed directly to us. Should I enjoy it? Well, I mean, it was good. It had its funny moments. It definitely was a funny comedy. Definitely can call it one of my favorite comedy films of the 60s. But I think its runtime, again, just kind of makes some of the moments feel less enjoyable than usual. Kind of like with these other films. But hey, I guess it's fine. I still enjoyed the movie. It still is a nice, fun picture. It's just, long runtime can sometimes make movies not as good as you could have imagined. But I enjoyed the imagination. Did I say what is wrong with me? It's not that. It's creative in good ways. It's a good movie. And yes, I think if you're into comedies from a very old period, like the 60s, then maybe you can enjoy this one. Unless you're not into runtimes that are super long. If you're not into long runtimes, then I don't know if you would like it. But I watched it, enjoyed it at some bit, and even though it wasn't as great as I could say, it was still good. So there's that. The Return of the King. The movie alone, as its theatrical cut, the theatrical cut of this movie is only 3 hours and 10 minutes long. It's a long movie at that point, but if you're thinking about watching the actual extended cut, which is what I watched, it is literally 4 hours long. Yes, the extended cut of this movie is 4 hours. I'm not kidding. I've seen a 4 hour long movie. 4 hour long movies do exist. There's Zack Snyder's Justice League movie that came out this year, but I didn't see it because I don't have HBO Max, if you remember what I said. But I have seen this film. It is among one of my favorite adventures to ever come out of cinema history. It is among the top 3 of my favorite movies ever. And it is 4 hours long. It is a conclusion to a trilogy of epicness that made for the greatest franchise of all time. It is so incredible. Just how much can be jotted down to finish off a trilogy in a 4 hour runtime. A 3 hour and 10 minute long runtime is something, but when your movie is 4 hours long with extended moments, you could think, will those extended moments be worth the long film? And in my opinion, they were. This movie wrapped things up super well. I just super loved all of it that this movie gave us. It's just so much to adore. So, yep, this is one of my favorite movies ever. Avengers Endgame may be better, but this one's longer, especially its extended cut. I don't know if Avengers Endgame will ever have an extended cut, but if it does, God knows how long that movie could turn out. But for now, let's just think about my version of this film. With the extended cut that I watched, of it being considered one of my favorite films ever, I love it in every way.
Did you enjoy this list? No, you didn't. But I made it anyway. Better luck for the next video. And I should make this video longer, so I will. I'm going to spend about a whole 10 minutes talking about stuff that has nothing to do with this video, but it's just there to waste the time so I can make this video as long as the rest of the movies that I've talked about on this list. So, for now, let's talk about how I